at break one time, he said that he ate a carton of Oreo cookies every night. Every night. And he said something about ice cream, but I was so stunned at the idea of somebody wiping out that many Oreos, I wasn't even hearing at that point. I was reeling.
Okay, and welcome back to the Essential Craftsman podcast. I'm Nate. I've got my dad here, the Essential Craftsman.
Howdy.
How are you doing?
We're doing good. Glad to be here.
We're going to talk about health, and this conversation will be one part update, one part sort of review, and then we'll finish talking about some of the things that have helped. You know, it's tough to be into fitness when you're a tradesman.
It is hard to be into fitness when you're a tradesman because you always go home. Well, you often, at least with carpentry and rough construction, you go home pooped, exhausted, and feeling like you've had a workout.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's hard to develop the momentum to do anything else.
To start out with, we're going to kind of talk about the spec house a little bit. When we first announced the project, even before we announced it, and you and I were just sort of talking about the idea, maybe your first and most significant concern was about the strength of your back, and as you put it, your ability to even build it at all. Talk about that a little bit. Why was that such a concern? And we'll go from there.
One of the first things that people think of when they think of old carpenters is kind of a stooped posture, kind of bent over, and shoulders and elbows and wrists and knees and backs that hurt. And that's an earned reputation because there's something called chronic abuse syndrome as it applies to joints, where repetitive action, particularly with weight, wears them out. And so starting about the time I was probably 34, starting at about age 34, man, my back was hurting a lot, to the point that by the time I was in my 40s, 5 or 6 times a year, Kelly would have to pull my socks on my feet in the morning and lace my boots up because I just couldn't get down there. Couldn't get to them.
And then once you got warmed up in the day, you could bend over and pick up your
pretty
tools
good
and stuff?
Yeah, usually once I got to the job and got the tools on and started moving around, particularly if here's something I would do, I would start out going around picking up trash off the ground because forcing myself to bend over and pick up the trash kind of loosened me up. And I realize now that I have been turned on to stretching as the key to eliminating back pain for me, that's all I was doing, was taking some time to stretch, being productive, picking up some light trash off the ground. But I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit. So 34, age 36 or 7, we moved back up here to Oregon. I went to work logging with Dad, and very counterintuitively, logging is much easier on your back than construction is, because everything in logging is so heavy that nobody thinks for a second you can really move it by hand. The logs are always moved with machinery now and cables. And so you usually aren't moving anything too much heavier than a chainsaw or pulling a winch line, which is a pull, but it's not a dead lift usually. And so the aerobic activity and the movement associated with cutting trees and setting chokers loosened my back right up while I was logging. And then I went back to construction. And right away, particularly as a solo, remodeler and just working by myself, if you ever watch the Crazy Framer on YouTube, he does a lot of stuff by himself.
Yeah,
he's got great solo techniques. There's solo techniques for everything, and they're all hard on your body. And so my back just hurt all the time. It just hurt.
Are you saying there were times in your career where you would turn work away or be unable to complete a project because of your back?
I hadn't gotten to that point, but my construction business here evolved into mostly additions and remodels, which is lighter work. I stepped away from the concrete. I hired Dustin more and more and more and poured less and less of it myself. And so I think just advancing age and back pain was changing the work I pursued. And so my reputation and my business contacts sort of shifted more to lighter work than it was earlier. But I hadn't thought about it till you asked that question, but I think at least part of that was because I just started focusing my attention in areas that felt like I could do them more confidently.
It could be that the last time you were building full houses, you were having a lot of back pain, and maybe you had sort of even just mentally moved away from that into the lighter work for your back's sake?
Not exactly. I got up here and didn't build many houses here. I was pouring more concrete. and the concrete is particularly hard on your back. And so as I pushed away from that, my back had been hurt enough that I morphed over into this other stuff. And so I don't remember ever making a conscious decision not to build or frame anymore, but it was a segue through concrete, I think, that kind of pushed me over into that other thing. But then this amazing thing happened. The first amazing thing, and I have to be upfront, and I attribute a lot of amazing things that happen in my life to divine intervention. I just do. I have reason to think that. And that most often for me is recognized as conversations and information that I get from unexpected sources, but not always. I had a neighbor, and I was telling him about my back pain, and he said, of all things, he said, well, how do you brush your teeth? I said, well, I have an electric toothbrush. And he said, well, and he was a nurse. And he said, well, then while you're brushing your teeth, just bend over and hang from the hips and gradually stretch out for the 2 minutes that the timer on that electric toothbrush has you brushing your teeth. Just stretch out, spread your feet about shoulder width, and hang. I started doing that. Wow, a lot of the pain diminished. And then the second amazing thing happened. My mom's health dropped off the edge of the world, and I began to start providing hospice care for her. And I was sleeping in the recliner in their living room while she was back in their space in a hospital bed. So I was sleeping out there at night once she got that far along. And by the third night that I slept in a recliner in a recumbent position instead of in a bed, flat on my back, I realized, wow, my back is not hurting near as much as it was just because of these two things.
Wow.
So I was encouraged, and that happened that happened after we did the retaining wall.
Yeah.
I just sort of muscled through the retaining wall, ibuprofen and muscle relaxants.
Yeah.
Got the retaining wall built, and then started sleeping in a recumbent position. And then a friend of mine, Evan Ricks, who's a physical therapist, he said, I think I can help you. So he started giving me some stretching exercises, and the stretching and the stretching out in the morning while I was brushing my teeth and sleeping in a recumbent position took away about probably 85% of my back pain.
So the framing is done. The heavy lifting, at least in terms of the construction and framing, is done. How did it do? How would you rate the back pain out of 10? What would you tell your 2017 self who was worried about it?
I would tell that self, you're going to be able to do this, and it's going to hurt, but a little bit of ibuprofen and a few muscle relaxants, not much. I like metaxalone, works really good. I would take a half a tablet in the morning, and I'd be good to go. Mm-hmm. And then just keep doing sit-ups in the morning and stretching, and you're going to be able to do it. And you're going to have Nate there, and Daniel will be there to carry the heavy items, and you're going to have a telehandler, so there won't be a whole bunch of carrying. Mm-hmm. And when you get to the end of it, it will not be your back that was your biggest problem. It will be the anxiety of building the house in front of a camera that will be your biggest problem. And a general lack of flexibility. And I'm 60, I'm not 30, so there is that. But we were able to get it done, and boy, I'm thankful.
You were dealing with some pretty major sleep issues throughout the construction before. Let's talk about that. And in case we had a similar podcast, one of our first episodes was about this, and we're redoing it because that was before
the house.
All the construction happened. So a lot of this is going to be related. But if this is relevant to your situation, you might check that episode out as well, because we were. Yep. We knew less then about it. Anyways, talk about your sleep, because you've kind of been on a sleep journey the last year or so.
So before I dive into that, let me give one piece of fatherly advice to young guys in construction, and that is learn to find, even if you can't find time to actively promote fitness, if you can't find the time or the motivation or the money or whatever stops you from pursuing fitness, find time to stretch. And keep that hamstring, that the cord that goes from the back of your ankles all the way up the back of your legs, through the seat of your pants and up your back and ties to the base of your skull. That bowstring just gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and it makes your back hurt. So stretch, and keep your abs fairly strong. So, having said all that, sleep issues. I never expected in my life to have sleep issues, because like my doctor says, ordinarily you think of people with sleep issues as also having, diabetes, and they're kind of fat, and they're smokers, or who knows what it is. You think that's kind of a basket of other physiological traits, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not me. I just have really severe sleep apnea, and I didn't know it until about a year and a half ago. Kelly had been complaining for 10 years that my snoring had become intense, and she must have been right. So when I finally mentioned it to the doc and I took the little test, and when I answered, do you fall asleep at stoplights? Yes, I fall asleep at stoplights a lot, or did. He said, yeah, you got sleep apnea. So we did sleep studies and yada, yada, yada. And right now I am trying to get used to a CPAP machine. And I hope that I can develop a taste for sleeping like that. And I'm assuming that I can, because I think it would be nice to not be sleep deprived. I think there's a whole range of health problems that come from that I never anticipated or took seriously.
Are you getting more sleep now with the CPAP machine?
Not yet.
No?
Not yet. It still disrupts. And I'm getting over a cold now for the last 2 weeks, and I haven't learned how to sleep with a CPAP machine on when I'm coughing and sneezing, and I haven't got it all figured out. But I people whose opinions I trust tell me that it will be a huge improvement when I nail it down, so I'm keeping at it.
It's just the kind of thing you have to get used to, basically?
Yeah. And one of the ways you do that is by putting it on in the middle of the day and reading a book or doing something, watching television or whatever you do that you could do chained to your CPAP, do it in the day just to kind of get used to the feeling.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I had to go through, this is my third different mask. I've got a gal, Karen, she's a great respiratory therapist, and I go into her and I say, this mask is not working. Okay, different mask, adjust it. Still not working. And she's got one on me now that I think is going to do it, I hope.
It may be hard to tell, but a year ago you were sleeping like 3 or 4 hours. I remember getting texts and emails from you, and it was like 3:30 in the morning, meaning you're working, and it seems like you're sleeping a little more than that, right?
I am. That was also stress driven.
Yeah.
Okay, so that stress was a driver on that. But I am doing better. I think that I typically am not waking up till 4 the first time now, and then after an hour or so I can go back to sleep for a little bit. So it's better. It is better.
It's amazing what stress will do to a person's health, whether it's sleep or their skin reacts or their stomach, whatever it is. Stress that can just destroy health
and thought process. So I have felt diminishing mental acuity.
Oh, really?
And memory, and I don't know if it's anything to be concerned about, but man, I have been having some memory issues. I think the comfort is they tell me, I've had doctors tell me that if you have Alzheimer's or something like that, you don't know it because your memory loss is of a sort, and so well, I don't know if this is true, but I think what I have is just 60-year-old man syndrome, where I just don't remember as well. But stress, I have learned, is a big driver on that. When you're stressed, you're foggy. You don't process the same, and so couple the stress with the sleep apnea, and man, I'm glad the summer's over.
Yeah. When I've met people who have a really, effective workout habit, they're going to the gym or CrossFit or running, and it's regular, and they sleep well and all that. It's just, I'm just so jealous of that. And it's something they've developed and they've worked towards, but all of these things, it's amazing how they work together. You work out, maybe you're more tired when you go to bed, so you sleep better. And if you are doing well in other parts of your life so that you can afford the hour a day away from your family, away from work, to work out, that's better also. It's like all of these things, like it's
quality of life.
God, it's like, it's like, I imagine people who are really wealthy who have, trainers and all this. It's like, man, that'd be pretty cool. But for a lot of people, me, other tradesmen, working out is almost like this luxury that I haven't been able to really force myself to. I know I'm saying that wrong. I know I could do it, and I should qualify. I have been running the last few months. I've run about 2 miles a day now, which has actually been a real positive thing for me. I'm working at the computer pretty much around the clock, and so that's helped. And I don't know if I'll be able to do it once we're at the spec house again.
Do your knees feel good and stuff?
Yeah, everything feels great. I feel great.
That be like?
I'm just like, I shouldn't even say running. It's more like a jog. It's like when you drive by and there's like some huge guy like just trotting along. I'm that guy. But it feels good. I don't know if I'll be able to do that once we start construction again, because I'm just exhausted. And it's like the last thing you want to do after a long day is then go beat your body up even harder. So how do tradesmen, have you ever known tradesmen who've had a big workout,
I've only known one, Jimmy Howard in Las Vegas, and he was primarily a bodybuilder.
Okay.
He was about the weightlifting, and I mean, his lunch, he would just have egg whites. The yolks would be thrown away in disdain because they weren't good for his body.
Wow.
And he would eat the whites,
That's cool.
And he was a little guy, man. He was
Strong.
He was strong, and he worked hard. And interestingly, he was a laborer when I was there, and he ended up as a superintendent for Martin Harris Construction on some big jobs. And so his self-discipline paid off in a lot of ways.
I have also noticed that the people who are able to instill that habit in their life and be fit and be trim are often the people who are also successful and at the top of the company. Dang. And it just seems like it's not a fluke. If you can take care of your body, if you can prioritize yourself and be disciplined, it's a related skill set to taking care of a company or a client or whatever.
What if it's just discipline? What if it's that? What if it's goals? I mean, we talked about goals a little bit. What if it's that they nail that down as I'm going to do this?
Yeah.
I don't know, man, I have to kind of agree though that these things seem to come together at least part of the time.
Well, it's true. If on the opposite hand, if a person is in terrible shape and eating terrible and all that, it's not easy to get excited about trusting that person with something more valuable if they're not taking care of the most valuable asset in their life, their own body.
Okay, so talking about construction stereotypes, I worked for Martin Harris in the same company. They had me in their tenant improvement. The part of the company that did TI, demountable partitions, suspended ceilings, pan ceilings, and they sent me over to the airport, and we were putting the glossy metal pan ceilings in an airport. There's miles of that stuff. And there was a couple old guys there that had been doing that for years, and they were teaching me. And one of those guys, Bill Cannell, was from Oregon. He was great. And the other guy, I don't remember his name, but he was very competent, and he wore an apron with a lot of tools in it, and he had to weigh 3 1/4, maybe 350.
Wow.
And loose.
Wow.
Loose. But that interior tenant improvement stuff is not very physical. You're shuffling around and at break one time, he said that he ate a carton of Oreo cookies every night. Every night. And he said something about ice cream, but I was so stunned at the idea of somebody wiping out that many Oreos, I wasn't even hearing at that point. Awesome. I was reeling. But I tell you what, he couldn't have lived much after I knew him,
There are certainly people who have a short straw and have genetics that don't help them out.
Yeah.
And it might be easy for some people. It might be a lot harder for others. It's still important for everybody.
It is. But think of the difference in human experience and human perspective, because it was the same company.
Yeah.
And Jimmy, what's his name, was eating egg whites and carrot sticks. And this other guy was going home and busting a carton of Oreos every night, and they were making about the same money.
Yeah.
And one was at the beginning of his adult life, and the other guy was right at the end of his. God. What a difference,
Yeah, that is really amazing. It's expensive to eat healthy. Mm-hmm. That's another important factor, especially with you're in the trades on the bottom end. You're not making a fortune, and it costs a lot of money to eat well. And junk food and fast food is really cheap. In fact, that's the hardest thing for me when I'm really working on a job in some shape or form. Is the speed and convenience of eating fast food is paramount.
Bam,
and that alone almost always pushes me through the drive-through lines because I'm not gonna go into a deli and have them make me some or buy vegetables. No, I gotta it's just fuel in a tank. And so
that's what it is.
Yeah.
You're fueling the machine, man.
So I don't know. Someone could hopefully chime in and give us some good tips on that. I'm actually trying, and hopefully when we start out, I'll not get in the habit of fast food. It's really a habit. That's a lot of these things. With fast food, if you're in the habit of buying and eating it, it's hard to break. If you're not in the habit, like my wife, you couldn't she wouldn't. You could put a gun to her head. It's just not you're not going to do it.
She's not doing it.
So the habit component to this is
habits are huge.
Yeah. I remember working on a job, one of your jobs, when I was 21, and it was a little deck removal, and I think you had run to the supply house or something, and this was a pivotal moment for me. The deck was getting demoed, and it was probably 10 feet by 10 feet. It was off Harvard in somebody's backyard, kind of a moldy old deck. Mm-hmm. And I was pulling it out, and I flipped up the deck kind of in one piece without separating it, kind of thinking, I'm going to flip this whole thing over and yank it out in one shot. And I had it up on its end, and it just beat me. It pushed me back down.
Pushed you back.
I tripped back. I fell or tripped back and landed right on my butt, and the thing kind of like hit me on the head. I helped and land on my head. I was fine, but it was very much a moment where I was like, wow, I thought I had the strength and power and athleticism to do that, and I got beat. And I got lucky. I know people have taken risks and failed and died. I didn't at that time, but
Sure.
It was definitely a moment. And I remember thinking, wow, I guess I'm in my 20s now, so I'm not a kid anymore, and this is
And it
what
still
it's
beat
like.
me.
It still beat me. At the time, I was thinking that I was getting old, and if I was 18, maybe I could have had the power to do that.
Right.
But the point is, I abused my body in that way, just assuming that my strength and I could beat this, and that's a bad habit to be in. Also,
It's a terrible habit. Piecework framing is the iconic place where those habits develop and wear you out. So Larry Hahn, he and his brother could build a house in a day, when it paid $90 or whatever it paid. You better believe they abused their bodies. They ran like sled dogs, right? And so I've lived that life. And pretty soon you realize, whoa, if I can figure out a way to roll the trusses on this roof by myself, I'm going to make all the money, and I don't have to split it with a partner. And so you find ways to do that. And then you come to the point where in order for me to do this by myself, I have to lift way more weight than I should. But if I can do it today, I'm going to make way more money today. And what it boils down to is we make the mistake of treating our bodies like they're rented equipment. And sooner or later, you're going to hammer it. And then you have a long, long time to look back and say, I should have realized that this was, in fact, my equipment, not something from a rental yard, and I'm stuck with it now.
We made the video about productivity and implied that sometimes just working hard was maybe a better option. But to your point, I think everyone in the trades and working with their body should be thinking and finding ways to make money, make a living with their head as opposed to their body.
Yep.
Not saying don't do it, not saying don't earn that money while you're young and strong, but man, I'm sure you saw a lot of 60-year-old men on their knees screeding gravel.
Yep.
You don't want to be there. No matter how strong, how fit, whatever, just find a way eventually to or plan a strategy where you are working with your brain instead of your arms.
Whether you're either doing something with a tool or a piece of equipment that's not tearing you up, or you're solving problems that other people can't solve, or you're establishing schedules that other people don't know how to establish, whatever it is, you got to work towards that.
Yeah, and that's the natural order on a job site. You start doing the thing, and then you become the expert, and so you can advise and oversee, or with equipment, you can graduate up. But what you don't want to do is party and drink and then just become the equipment itself.
That's right.
What's my expertise? My expertise is whatever nasty labor job you've become good at.
That's right. So a couple things, using your body like it's rented equipment can include what I talked about earlier about not resting it, not changing the oil, not checking the oil, not checking the tire pressure in the tires, but just hammering it. That's a mistake. The other way it manifests, speaking of working hard, is when you have a choice between lifting more or moving quicker, move quicker. Because moving quick doesn't tear your joints up, but lifting more does tear your joints up. I used to take great satisfaction out of putting 2 or 3 2x10s or 2x12, 16-foot over my shoulder, and then grunting over and dropping them on the deck, and I thought I was doing something important. Or 5 2x4 16s on my shoulder, and thinking I should have been taking 2 each time and moving quicker, and you get the same amount over there in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And so always substitute speed for mass if you can.
We find ourselves in the position of still actually working with our bodies and hands, because we say this, and yet in a month we're going to be hanging drywall and lifting siding and
setting in 400-pound windows.
Some of you computer programmers and engineers who spend all day at a computer would have valuable insight to this, because that's not ideal either. And you're making money with your head, but it also comes at a cost. So I don't know the answer. There is a serious balancing act in 2020 of labor and health and food and fitness and all these items. And man, we got to sort it out for ourselves.
We've got to sort it out for ourselves, but don't make the mistake of overthinking any of this.
Yeah.
Because I've known people who get so concerned with their own fitness that they lose track of being concerned with their fitness to be part of anyone else's life. That their health and their concern and my time and my trumps every other thing. And so they become just a solitary gym rat with a body like Charles Atlas and not one friend or not, and they miss the boat on families and children. And so it's easy for all of this to assume a significance in your life that is just out of balance.
Kids really are like the death sentence to fitness for a lot of people, because when you have kids and you go home from work, like your evening and your night is dominated. And for me, probably I don't know. Well, at least like half of the time I put one of my kids to bed, I fall asleep like right there with them when I'm reading them a book, because it's exhausting. There's like this 3 hour just like crazy hour.
Relentless.
Yeah.
Relentless.
And so, but the point being, as your generation, and as you would agree, like having the kids so you have them later in your life is one of the most valuable things you can do for your fitness and well-being and satisfaction. So it's a price.
It is.
It's a price you pay. And for me and a lot of dads, that's why the dad bod is a kind of a thing, because something's got to give. And for a lot of us, it's going to the gym.
Yeah, because having those kids is going to take you further towards being happy when you're 60 than having a resting heart rate of 60, blood pressure of 120 over 90, and whatever the other criteria would be. A lot of guys with those physical characteristics are pathetically unhappy because they burned every other worthwhile bridge.
I do know guys who they've cracked the code. They're in great shape. They work out every day. They eat well. They have a beautiful family and kids. It can be done. This is we're not laying out some unattainable thing.
Yeah, no.
This is a goal that can be achieved, or at least we can get closer to it.
So how about this? Don't use your body or your family like they're rented equipment.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you got questions, you can leave them in the comments on YouTube on EC2. We added this service to our website. It's called SpeakPipe. I don't think I mentioned this to you.
Oh, what is this?
It's a kind of like a voicemail system. We've wanted to do question and answers, or at least call-in type things on this show here.
Interactive a little bit.
Well, yeah, but it's hard because live streaming it's hard to do that. It like introduces a component that's challenging. Anyways, this service called SpeakPipe, you can go to our website, record a question or a message or a comment, and we can then in a show here play those and answer those. So it's a way to do a Q&A in a more controlled
awesome
way.
So if there's one of you guys comments a lot on both channels, and your handle is PSID Vicious, Sid Vicious.
Yeah, that guy's cool.
Man, your comments are so spot on. I can tell you have decades in the trades, man. You are always on the mark, and I would love it if you had any specific questions or comments that you could get to us in that way. I'd like to meet you for that matter, but anyhow, scope that out if you can, Sid.
I'm going to put that on our website, SpeakPipe. Go to essentialcraftsman.com/podcast, and I'll put a link there where you can find it. And maybe in one of these next episodes or two, we can do a sort of, it's not going to be call-ins, but we can at least hear from some of you and get some answers to your specific questions right from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
All right, we'll catch you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.